Welcome to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend Guard, your host, and I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School and a faculty fellow at the A.B. Friedman School of Business at Tulane. And I just want to quilt. So today we talk to Sandra Scheiber Johnson. She is here to talk to us about all kinds of quilty things, and this is part 1 of 2.
I'm Sandra Scheiber Johnson. I'm calling from Whittier, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles.
My dad was born in Whittier.
Oh, there's so many people who have that story.
It's so weird, right?
I've been born in the hospital that my grandfather-in-law worked at, so.
That's so weird. Oh, so sweet. So Whittier, it's in Orange County. It's outside of Los Angeles, and it's like a thing.
It's technically Los Angeles County, but I like to
it is?
that it is so far southeast LA County that it is practically.
That's so funny. I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, Whittier College I'm here because I went to Whittier College initially, so that's how I knew the community. And when I moved down to Los Angeles to get a postdoc at University of Southern California, of course, we were most comfortable in these neighborhoods here. And I had lots of friends and a support system here. So it's a second home for me.
That's really nice. I like that. It's really nice. Okay, and tell me your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life.
So the first memory I have of someone sewing or quilting in my life is practically my first memory of my mother sitting at the sewing machine in the extra room my father had built. Just seeing her there, she sewed all our clothes, and I carried around a piglet and an Eeyore, and I think the first time it occurred to me that somebody made that and that my mom made that was when I asked where, we had other animals too. We had Tigger and we had Roo, but no Kanga. So I started being a little curious, where did these come from?
Uh-huh.
And I discovered that my 2 older brothers had pretty much destroyed Pooh, but that my mom had made them. And so that was the first idea that things could be made, and I wanted to make things.
That's really cool. I love that. Do you still have them?
No, my mother's not terribly sentimental. In fact, when I returned from my first semester of college, there were some of my meal points and stuff that were strangely absent.
Oh my goodness. She's practical. Let's just move on.
Phenomenally practical, not terribly sentimental, except for on a few things. We lost her a few years ago,
no,
so
I'm sorry.
Now I'm dealing with what sentimentality that she did have. Very slowly. It's been about 3 years, and we've just started opening up some boxes.
It's hard, isn't it? It's so funny. It's funny that you say that. It's hard, isn't it? Once you lose your mom, it's this really hard thing. I find my mom's been gone 10 years, and it's a struggle. It's such a weird thing.
Yeah, well, and hers was phenomenally sudden at a very a crossroads in my life, and yet I knew immediately that everything needed to be put down for the first time in my life. It was there's a couple of points in my life where it's I had no questions about where I needed to be. But my father was 10 years older than my mom. So it was a matter of it's time to take care of dad.
Yeah.
And so,
I get
in
that.
You go into
warrior mode, right? There's a kind of
triage. I like to think of it as triage.
Triage.
You just kind of, things need to be done, and I'm very good at making lists and everything. And my brothers were a little paralyzed, but also willing to help. So I just kind of turned into the general and put everybody at ease. And you just
it's so true. Gosh, it takes me back.
So that
it's a lot. Yeah.
Get everything feeling safe.
That's right. Exactly. That it's all going to be okay. It's so interesting, right? It takes me back to that time, and it's just, it's different. You're a different person after that happens, but you're also, you don't have any room, at least for me, I didn't feel like I had room to mourn in some way. I was just,
actually, I'm kind of just there right now.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. You know, I mean, she was a phenomenal influence in my life. My mother was so incredible, and we found out so many incredible things about her when she passed away as well. But there was a point in time where I just could not throw away one more thing, and so I have stupid things in boxes that.
That's really interesting.
Like, why did you keep it? It's like because emotionally, I just like
you can't.
I was done.
Yeah, I get it.
I just needed to like start. We needed to move forward a little bit. And my father actually passed away a year ago. I was not unexpected and everything. His health was a little bit more frail than my mom's, but I think I finally feel like now, like this is kind of my new normal, and I feel like you do join the Orphans Club.
Yeah, it's different, isn't it?
It is very different,
yeah.
And I think that it sounds like you were on the leading edge of our generation to have lost our mothers.
Yeah, she died when she was 68.
Yeah.
So it's
and
tough.
I gotta say that a lot of the kids who I knew growing up who lost their parents, their mothers or fathers even earlier, they were the first to come to me and just kind of be a nice calming presence, and friendships that I did not even expect to come through in those moments. But God bless Facebook.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For all the problems Facebook has right now, and they do have problems, they do create community that's really important as well. So it feels like we are more connected and more loving. And I know there's hate and all that. I get it. There's problems, but at least in my experience, I feel like I have more community, obvious, and more. They're just different. It's just
right. Well, I carefully controlled my community from the beginning. I got my first email address in 1990.
You did.
So I do feel a little bit like a digital native. Maybe not someone who had that in high school, but I had no illusions about privacy.
Yeah.
So and ads, and I had a strange fascination for technology podcasts early on, and I would sit and listen them speak about security and privacy, and I just always locked down everything. And a lot of my friends were like, well, I don't want everybody knowing my business. It's like, well,
they already do.
Right.
I remember, when you know,
shut down all of my interests and stuff because I knew that they were culling data. I'm a data person.
Right.
I will do 23andMe for reasons that I just simply don't trust. I don't want my genome out there, and I say that as a molecular biologist.
Yeah.
So, that data can't be controlled.
Data can't be controlled.
Really, what are they going to do with that? And I think that you're probably being in an academic institution and with a department that's in law, a law professor. I think that you probably are very familiar with some of these conversations and what is going to happen.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. It's interesting, isn't it? I remember, speaking of moms, I'm going to have two more mom stories. I remember when my mom wouldn't get one of those cards at like Ralph's or Safeway that would give you discounted off because she didn't want them knowing what she was buying.
Exactly. And
she's like, it wasn't worth it. The discount wasn't worth it.
Right. But then there's the value of time, though, right? It's like, well, then what do you have to do? You have to sit there and spend hours cutting coupons and figuring out coupons and then sending the husband off to the market to write coupons, and then him standing there and saying, I couldn't find this item. It's like, well, then just get the generic.
Right. Exactly, man. The Sunday paper with the coupons, big thing.
But I use junk email for those. They all get the junk email on that one and get nothing more. And
it's true. Like, what percentage of Gmail is junk email that people just keep making new versions of their email? Like, that would be really interesting, right?
Right. I have lost track of how many email addresses I have.
Yes.
So it's and I think more importantly, when you do sign up for a program, it's like, the people I really trust get the personal email, and then there's the professional email, because you never send anything to your work email that has anything to do with professional. And then there's you get the ads, and like, okay, I don't care if you know who I am, and I may even be Daisy Conway to you, to be quite frank. We do have our alter egos here.
Indeed. Yes, it's so interesting. Well, so yeah, so mom. So your mom is your first memory of sewing. How did you start sewing yourself?
So, interesting. My mom did not teach me to sew. I think my mother worked. This was like from 1961 on as a economy issue for our family. So I think her sewing was her downtime from her 4 kids.
Uh-huh.
And we had a healthy respect for that. And when she bought her Bernina, that was a prized possession for her.
Yeah.
That was her balance activity. So my learning to sew was always going to be up to the school district. And that was built up for me from an early age, having a brother 60 years older than me telling me all about what the girls were sewing in class, and seeing them walk down the street in these formal dresses that they made in class. It's like it was built up pretty much.
Interesting.
That when I got to go to Clayton, I think that's the only thing I think that ended up bearing out to be everything I wanted it to be.
Really?
From middle school, right?
That's really interesting.
And part of that is I had an absolutely phenomenal teacher, Kendall DePoli, who ends up being a seminal educator in Reno, Nevada, in the Washington County School District. They named a school for her. She died early of endometrial cancer, but she was a quilter.
Interesting.
And so in the 6th grade, of course, I found her classroom, and I kind of like wandered on by, just kind of peek in, and they were making quilt blocks. And the minute I saw it, it's like, yes, forget the formal dress. That is what I want to sew.
That's really interesting. And what year is this that we're talking?
This is 1982, and she's definitely in that generation. She graduated from college in '69, so definitely in the group of the '70s, and she is one of the early members. If you speak to quilters from Reno, Nevada from that era, they all know Kendall DePoli.
So interesting. And so, did you just keep quilting from then, or sort of what did your quilting life look like?
Well, so we did a couple of interesting projects there. We made a sampler quilt to auction off so that we could purchase down vest coats to make that spring semester of our 8th grade year. And then my final project was a quilt as you go, a log cabin quilt, which I don't have. For some reason, I kept on putting things that I made into garage sales. That kind of thing. Yeah, so I was sewing and everything, but when I went to college, just the privilege of getting to go away to college and having a scholarship, I felt really obligated to be serious. And I was a biochemistry major, and that seriousness stuck with me all the way through my graduate work, up until one of those moments when we found out my brother had AIDS.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So that's interesting. So during your graduate work, you didn't turn to quilting. You were just focused on the work that you did as a graduate student.
For lack of a better word, well, I won't use the word machismo, but there's a seriousness among scientists where I just kind of feel like there's a one-upsmanship of how completely absorbed you are in your science, and that if you're not doing this, you're not.
Yeah. No, I get it. I felt that way with the doctoral work. I did a doctorate in European history, and there was nothing else in my life. I was completely immersed, and that's all it was. It was only actually when I went to law school. I don't know what that says about law school, but then I was cross-stitching and quilting, and I just needed a break from the... I would
sneak things in, of course, just because I also felt I had this calling to make. But in particular, I kind of learned that it was BS because, I got to go to a lot of meetings, and you would meet these really successful people, and it's like, oh, I garden and I play the flute. And
I know, crazy, right?
Yeah. And they're really happy, and they're publishing well, and I'm like, you guys are just bullies.
Yeah, but you know what? I think what happens, I totally think this is what happens, because we work so hard to be academics. Like, the road is hard. It is just grueling. And then you get full professor. You get to a space in your career, at least I have, and then it shifts. Because, you've got the foundation, and you've got the extra time now, and you've put in the hours that, Like the amount of hours you put in, people don't really understand. Like there is no time when you're awake that you're not working on the work you do when you're a grad student, you know?
Right. And I'm like out in my garden, and I'm like thinking, we will have been stuck in this problem. And then like I would come, and it just kind of like, you just let your mind relax a little bit. And then you're like, all of a sudden it's like, let's try
That's
this
right.
and solve this
That's
problem.
right.
So
And I think that as you get older, that balance comes back. But there's so much pressure as a young academic, don't you think?
Well, yes, and that is part of the issue as well, because in life sciences, I think it's even more grueling. We're always part of the budget that gets cut, and I'm just part of this generation of scientists that it's delayed and delayed and delayed, moving into the research track. And the more I looked at it, I realized, could I do it well? Probably, I would probably be completely miserable. And you have to be willing to chase tenure across the country. And
That's right.
It came down to, I did not want to put my family through that, nor myself.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to attach myself to a really well-respected, wonderful woman. And she just kept me engaged. We kept on moving the project, doing different things. And so I was never really bored until I did get to a point where, all right, I want to do something else. And that's part of my quilt journey as well, ironically, because she had the opportunity to move to Baylor College of Medicine. I took a hard look at what we were doing, and we would be able to do it better there. Mm-hmm. And so my last ditch effort to see if even people were encouraging me to do non-tenure and to collaborate with her was, let's not discount this completely, but is it going to be different in Texas?
Yeah.
So I helped move the lab to Houston because I believe that that's where her work would go well. And even it turns out this year she's moved on to the Keystone Symposium because, she's saw the opportunity for her to do so much in science there and influence communities there.
Interesting.
It's just in Los Angeles, it's a peculiar thing. You do if your commute's an hour, you're doing well, and so you do put a lot of energy into that.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's why you were an early podcast adopter, I imagine. Did you?
Absolutely. Well, in addition to that, I figured out that it was about the same to ride the train. So,
yeah.
And there's no radio on the train. So
that's great. I love. Yeah, when we lived in London, I rode the train in, and it was awesome. I love the train.
I'm a big believer in mass transit. My current work actually is moving to a location that I can walk right off the metro.
That's so cool.
So fortunate, and we won't have to sell the house.
That's really great.
Do it. So it's I've managed to position myself. I will have to note, every single time I had to sit there and write my teaching philosophy, I did get a little depressed. So that tells me that maybe academic life, at least in the formal sense, and as someone who likes to run the show, I could see myself doing it. Probably would have ultimately made me not as happy as I could be. So I transitioned to industry after my mother passed away.
Interesting. And you like it better?
It's different. Yeah. It's a different sort of problems. I'm working for a startup, a biotech startup. That commute's much longer. It's between 3 and 4 hours a day that I'm on the road.
Whoa.
So I'm grateful that we're moving someplace that's off the track. But most people don't really stick with a company for more than 2 years.
That's craziness.
So I kind of have to evaluate with my level of experience. I had to prove fit still. So I'm kind of not really where I would be if I was an academic. But I'm learning a lot at a startup.
Yeah, that's huge. Those are huge. And it's huge experience. It's really, it's such a different thing. All right, so tell me how quilting is connected to your brother and how you started to get into quilting again.
Okay, so when my brother was diagnosed, I was fortunate to be going to graduate school where I grew up in Reno. And so it was just kind of unquestioned that we would help him through this journey. And that's something that he had.
So just like, let's back up, just in case people haven't been listening carefully, because I know people are driving or quilting. Tell us about your brother and who your brother was.
Okay, so my older brother was 6 years older than me. He was a gay man. We knew that he was gay, I want to say about the same time I started learning to quilt and everything. And to my parents' credit, we didn't know what to do with this information, but the first words out of my dad's mouth were, we don't get this, but we love your brother. And so, you're a young man, and you're having
what year is this that this is happening?
1982, I want to say.
92?
82.
82, got it.
82. So he's first wave.
He's first wave.
Very close to San Francisco. That's where your community to find people like you are. I remember them going back and forth, and I think that one of my friends is still alive. But when AIDS came around, there was he was part of the community that kind of felt like that certain helplessness, and that there wasn't going to be anything.
Nobody understood what was happening, and it hit hard, and it hit fast, and it was crazy, right?
It really did. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty, and that fear. First of all, when my brother came out, we were deeply in touch with the idea that this is not a protected class. Mm-hmm. Certainly not in 1982, and this would impact potentially his ability to have a job. My mother was a college student in San Francisco when Harvey Milk was assassinated.
Oh my goodness.
I think they were very in touch with, we always had this certain sense of dread that what happened to Matthew Shepard could happen to eventually, and that was after my brother had passed away, of course, but we always lived in fear that somebody would hurt my brother.
I get it. Right.
And so it isn't that we weren't out and proud because we were ashamed. It was because
you were really just protecting him. Yeah.
Ultimately, it came down to we loved him, and that it was his story.
Yeah.
But we also lived with this certain dread that, does he have it? How is it spread? Just the misinformation on that. And as a scientist, we have some notable people who contributed to that, that unfortunately are discredited. But, I think that there was just a lot of, because it's associated with sex, the stigma and everything. And I like to think that going through that crucible has made it, helped people wake up a little bit. But, he was diagnosed late into his disease progression. When he was diagnosed, he had, I think, his white blood count was 1 per millimeter, which, the academics were like, you should be dead. And he wasn't. So he had a very healthy immune system. But it took about, I want to say, 14 months. And, we moved him back into my parents' home, and I fortunately had a PI who let me run my own schedule, but my research did suffer, but I didn't have to stop. I'm grateful to him. It took longer. And we got him through it, and we nursed him to his end in December of 1994.
Wow.
And it was not typical, but it was hard. There were physicians that were like, well, what do you want us to do? Almost angry. And we're like, well, we don't know. You tell us, kind of thing.
Right.
And so it was hard. And that was a leading topic of research at that time. It's a biochemist. And it's like, I wasn't really compelled to study it because I didn't want my motives to be clouded in my science. So,
right. And you were living with it. So it's very different.
Rather privately.
Yeah.
But his work was very supportive. He worked at JCPenney, and his colleagues, if they had problems, ironically, my brother and I had worked there off and on. If there were problems, they weren't talking about it. Mark was very well loved.
That's really amazing. So he passed away, and you decided to make a quilt panel for the AIDS project, the NAMES project?
I was aware of the Names Project, and it had kind of become a cultural phenomena.
Yeah, hugely.
And Mary Fonz's talk about it at QuiltCon this last year was absolutely phenomenal, and I regret that she only had an hour. Her perspective was really interesting because being so close to it, my experience in Reno, Nevada was that quilters were helping people make the panel, and there were advertisements in the paper right around the time he was dying that there were going to be these workshops. It was so soon. He decided he died on December 2nd, which is always the day after World AIDS Day. So we're always on my mind that there's not a cure. And then the exhibition at the convention center was going to be February 25th. And so it was all really new. But I always kind of like thought to myself, well, I hope I never have to make one. And I hope that this isn't when I have to make it. But I kind of felt like if I didn't make one at that time, even so shortly after he died, I didn't think I was going to make one at all.
Yeah.
And so I screwed up my courage and I walked in, and there were quilters at this community session, and they were kind of like, okay, we're here to help. And I go, okay, I think I know what I'm doing. Just want to make sure I know what the rules are. And they said, well, if you need us, we're here. Come back.
That's amazing.
And
that's really amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of see though now that it was after this period of time that I kind of got to know the quilting community. I can see why it wasn't readily embraced.
Is that what Mary said, that the quilting community wasn't super embracive of this kind of community activism?
Yeah, I hope that she just gets the opportunity to put pen to paper and talk about it, because I think that this is there is a place for this in the world. But it was. I mean, transgender and LGBTQ issues are still huge.
They're huge.
Still huge and still polarizing.
Yeah.
And
they are.
I think that at that particular time was really transitional. I hadn't intended to out my brother to the entire community, but there was his name in the newspaper as one of the panels in toured. And it was at that point in time, it's like, okay, we're going to be upfront about that. And I think that what I came to find out was in that action is people came up to me. It was the first time they knew someone who died of AIDS. And I think that in 1994, that's kind of where we were. People were starting to realize that everybody knows somebody who has AIDS or knows somebody who knows somebody.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's where people are like, yeah, there are gay people in the world. So
there
what?
Are gay people in the world. That's
there
right.
Are gay people in the world. So what? And if this is what we had to go through to eventually get to the point of, dude, let people love people and let them get married.
Yeah.
Because it is a huge pain in the ass if you can't, for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I like to think that helped. So,
really interesting.
it was there.
So what was it like to make the panel? Like, what was the act of making it? Did it feel like it was part of your mourning process, or did it feel more like a political act? Like, what did it feel like to be doing that panel in 1994?
A little of both. It was really scary because I was putting it out there.
Yeah.
And I looking at my panel, I went down to Kiko's and I put my favorite family photos in there. So I was putting a face to this is who my brother was, and he had family and he had friends and he was well loved. Just the humanity of it. That was really important to me, but also I wanted to construct something that spoke to what made my heart sing about quilting. And so I'm looking at it now and I didn't realize it, but I have a little of everything in there.
Yeah.
I have applique. I have improvisation. I didn't know what improvisation was. I just knew it was something you did. And I put in like different panels, and I worked really hard to use complementary colors and use colors that were bright and vibrant and just said this was a life worth celebrating.
It's really cool.
You know, and to me, that's where I was with it. For a lot of people, though, it was also like, yeah, it's shaped like a gravesite.
Yeah.
Our coffins. And I think that was something that ACT UP, you know, when you have people who are sitting on information, it turns out, and being politically expedient for their own motivations instead of being brave, and saying this is a fight worth fighting, and I may lose my political stature, but this is the right thing to do. It's really hard because you kind of feel like it can make the difference.
Yeah.
Protease inhibitors came out the next year. You know, there are people who, if they lived in certain communities, that were like, yeah, get your butt down to that clinical trial, that are still alive. It was a really transitional period. So it's kind of hard looking back on it now, but at that moment in time, it was more like owning it and not being afraid anymore.
That's right.
It really was. And gratefully, and there were people who were kind of jerks about it. There was a notable scientist who was advocating that the disease wasn't caused by the virus, which was so hard to get that information out to begin with, to sit there and like try to prevent another theory. And there were these like jerky little undergraduates who, like, you know, think that science is all controversial and like want to be provocative, coming up to me. It's like, well, don't you want to go to his talk? It's like, no, I don't want to go to that jerk's talk.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, because he's being irresponsible. He just didn't understand what it meant, what it means to be sitting there and casting doubt on a decision that was hard fought. Putting science out there shouldn't be political, and yet it is. And that was like the first encounter.
So interesting.
That it was. And it's, you know, unfortunate that, you know, when people are dying, you have to be brave and do the right thing.
Yeah.
And there are parallels now. Environmental, giving the CDC the right to study gun violence. It's just, you know, so I hadn't really connected it to the activism until I really started to see what came up with, it's come up more recently with the modern quilt pool, embracing a lot of the social movements out there and giving them a stage, and seeing Jackie Gearing's thing.
Yeah. Jackie, like, we've interviewed her. She's amazing, right? Yeah. All her quilts are amazing, and Sean Kimber, and the kind of protest quilt, like people taking up social activist movement things in their quilts. A lot of people trace that to the name's quilt, the AIDS Project, and that quilts can communicate how we feel about the world in ways that are incredibly moving. Right.
Yeah. But to Mary Fonz's point is well taken. Cleve Jones did not approach this as a quilter, nor was necessarily helped by the quilt community.
Right. And Cleve Jones was the one who had thought about it, and he was also a friend of Harvey Milk's. So he was So he was trying to figure out how to express the number of people that were dying and how to make them more visible, and decided to do it as a
anchor for him. In the Commonwealth Club out of San Francisco, California, they have a very long podcast. They put all their radio programs into podcasts. I owe it. He speaks quite regularly, and I think if you follow his conversations over time, it was appropriate for him at that point in time in his life, and he's moved on to other things. But for him, it was very much an act. It was something he felt compelled to do, I believe, if I understand. And I hope I'm not misrepresenting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that I've heard him,
But my impression is that he just didn't care. He really didn't care what people thought. It was something that he needed to do, and it became something even more.
So interesting.
But, you know, Mary Fonz had a front row seat to what the quilt community was from the beginning as well. So I think that she probably had, growing up, an ear for what people may have said that weren't as close to the AIDS quilt project were. necessarily.
Well, I mean, the thing that's so interesting.
But they didn't drive one another, and I think that that's kind of one of the points that she had. And some of them, I think, culturally speaking, I can see how the conservative part of our quilt community would sit there and say that's not quilting.
Well, and the thing that's so interesting about when you see them all together is that it is not always traditional quilting, right? It's every medium. It's much more in our vein of art quilt in some way, like that. It's some are glued, some are piecework, some not, some applique. Like what you're saying, it was there were no like quilt police telling people how they could and couldn't do the work that they were doing, and also in some ways, like I wouldn't say primitive, but it's the time period. Like you think about like, if that project was done today, it might look different. We think about like the Social Justice Sewing Academy, sort of, we're more sophisticated in sort of how we make quilts that are protest quilts, I think, in some way. And this was a community-based project of people that may or may not quilt, and it was about the fact that people were dying, and that it wasn't about people or quilting. And I think that always strikes me with this project, of that it was about the community, not about the quilting. It just happened that it was a quilt. And so I could see why people who were quilters, right, 90s, I'm a quilter, would be a little offended that that space was being taken up by something that they didn't in their mindset see as a quilt. So, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I mean, I could see that happening.
That's part of my quilt journey as well, because I mean, I think that this kind of renewed in me a sense that I do need to create. I mean, I always needed to create. I had Sunshine Family Belts, for crying out loud. And they came with all these little craft projects that you made. And that was my favorite thing to do as a little girl. But I kind of feel like that this is a little tied up in the, where a lot of women in particular, that this was their area to shine.
Yeah.
Having been a synchronized swimmer as well, women do. There is a certain Martha Stewartness to things where everything is that we're encouraged to present perfection in a way. And if you this is where you are accomplished.
That's right. That's right.
And this is where you are allowed to have knowledge.
That's right.
That is not. It may be dismissed as it's just a hobby.
Right.
But, you're allowed to do a deep dive in a research. You're not being talked over by men.
Right.
Look at what Barbara Brackman did.
Yeah.
And a lot of these early historians, it's like, this was a world where, there was no glass ceiling, in my opinion, unless there was when it came to making fabric and things like that. I can kind of see how, like, you would want to control your life, control your world. This is your control time. This is your time. Nobody's going to necessarily bother you when you're quilting. That, somebody's coming in with something completely different and calling it quilting. And it's like, this is where I'm accomplished, and this does not speak to me as quilting. And
and it's like someone's trying to take away that from you because, they're defining it now as something else.
But where the parallel is like, there's a lot of room for love.
Right.
Right. Guess what? You love who you want to love, kind of thing, right? So, like, there's a lot of it's a big tent, lots of room in here, lots of room. One person being accomplished in one area does not take away your accomplishments. But it was a lot of that kind of like note and being in my early 30s and wandering into a quilt shop, I encountered a certain kind of woman often that kind of told me that what I was doing wasn't quilting, because I was making it with a sewing machine and I wanted to quilt with a sewing machine. And having a deep respect for my elders and people who had experience, and knowing that I hadn't made very many quilts, and just trying to figure out what I wanted to be. It's like I decided that I was going to go home and not quilt it, but what their version of quilting was not
what you wanted. Yeah,
and what
I get it.
Doing wasn't. And as it was, I had a hard time in the Los Angeles community. Our quilt shops were really spread out. A lot of them ran from 9 to 5.
Yeah.
weekend hours. They would offer 1 or 2 classes on the weekend. And so I really kind of struggled to find where I was. And, fortunately, being pretty brave and enterprising, I tried to figure it out for a long time on my own. Eventually, I would try initially to find stuff on the internet. It wasn't there when I was looking.
Yeah.
I don't know how I missed it, but this 2005, 2006 era is about the time that I finally decided.
Yeah, I think you're too early. I think it all starts. I mean, I think that like the Crafty Nomad starts around, I think, not Crafty Nomad, the Crafty Gemini starts around 2005-ish, but other stuff starts in 2008, that you were early.
Right,
and,
yeah. So, I have this book here, Amish Quilts. Not only that, I liked quilts that weren't quilting. I bought this when I was working at the fabric store in 1986 about Amish quilting. I knew that this was the quilting I wanted to do. Yeah. It was not what I bought I think I bought this, I want to say in my graduate years when it's like, okay, this is the authoritative Mary Fonz.
So you're holding up the Quilter's Complete Guide from Fonz and Porter, right?
Yeah, it's like, well, I do what you do. You go to the bookstore and it's like, okay, I need to figure it out. Apparently I don't know what I'm doing. So I go down and get this and I'm like, oh, okay, but it's like I have this too. So I know that I'm not full of it, but everybody's doing this. And it's like, okay, well, at very least I need to learn the technique.
Yeah.
And I was a little discouraged, I have to say, but God bless Eleanor Burns. I found the road to California. It was like I could get 3 days off and go and do something, but they had, I found it kind of too late to get in classes. Back then you would mail in your stuff and classes were filled up and everything, but they had this round robin thing where quilt entrepreneurs would have 5 minutes and you would like speed date your way through the room. And I walk in there and here is Eleanor Burns, who I could never figure out when she was on PBS, but I saw her a few times and I was like, well, that's kind of corny, but I kind of like it. And as I have to add that when we were in school, if you sewed, it's like you were Miss Holly Homemaker and you weren't serious about your career. So there was that kind of dismissiveness going on as well. But man, she was so approachable. And I was like, I fangirled just a little bit, but man, she just said, yeah, go for it. I don't know what the conversation was, but I walked away from it that if a rock star quilter is as nice as that person and is telling me to go for it, I'm going to go and do whatever my version of quilting is after that. And the next 4 years, I signed up for any technique. It may not have been the project I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to learn the technique. And I was very fortunate that just about every teacher I ever met was just so positive and so not that woman in the quilt shop going, well, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And not what are you doing? And I'm curious. And
negative. That kind of judginess. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my father was a hardware salesman, so I know I know my way around builder's hardware, and I can tell you how many times in Home Depot I was told, I just want to make sure you don't know, you're not making a mistake. And I'm like, I assure you I'm not.
It's hard, right?
That kind of confidence too, that I belonged in a quilt shop and shopping and doing whatever the heck I wanted.
That's really great. I love it. All right. So I think that's so interesting. So again, let's just review the date. So your brother comes out in 82. He gets sick pretty quickly after that, or is it a decade?
Yeah, well, I think early on. I mean, no, actually, he wasn't really sick. I want to say until
the 90s.
93. He had a seizure. There's a couple of different ways that the disease can present itself. HIV does attack the nervous system. As well, and so his immune system, for whatever reason, he wasn't getting the frequent colds or anything like that. Although every time he had a cold, we're like, "Does he have it?"
Right.
Okay. He had a seizure, and God, you talk about life-changing moments. Like the phone rang a different way that day, and I got the call, and it's like, and I just kind of had the sense of like, your brother's in the hospital, and he had a serious seizure. Can you come get him? And it's like I just kind of knew that life changed at that moment.
And so he passes away. The first show of the quilt is in 1987 on the Mall. And then it was also displayed in 96. I'm looking at Wikipedia.
Right.
And you make your quilt. He passes away in 94. Is that when?
Late 94.
Late 94.
It's the time that communities are starting to bring in sections of the quilt.
Yeah.
Throughout, that it starts becoming something that tours.
Yeah.
And there are brave people in communities. The LGBTQ community worked with a number of people to bring that into Reno. As a matter of fact, in fact, there was a controversy about allowing 5th and 6th grade students from certain schools go to the quilt as a part of their sex ed class.
Yeah.
Ed class, and it was voted down. And the conversation in the newspaper there was just, I went back and reviewed it yesterday. It's like really interesting. But it was pretty much like they just didn't want to make it about sex. And it's like, come on, guys.
Right.
You know, really. And like, these kids can't handle it. It's like, well, I think you need to kind of know what kids were handling like maybe 10 years ago when I was there, and kind of get with reality. But
interesting.
Culturally, this is when abstinence-only education was
so interesting. And then what happened to the panel? Do you have it, or what happened to the panel who has it? What happened to it now? Do you have it? Is it been donated, or what happened to it?
It becomes part of the traveling of the quilt exhibit. There's no place that they can fully display it now, of course. But if you want to display it, you can. It's been out to Reno a couple of times because they showed it at the health department sometime in the last decade. I can't remember, the Washoe County Health Department. So, they'll send out parts of the panels, ones that are holding up a little bit more.
Yeah. There's a lot of preservation issues right now with that.
They weren't made by quilters that were making for
and they weren't made of materials that were supposed to. I mean, they were immediacy. There was immediacy to it that is really interesting.
Right. And a lot of them were art quilts.
Yeah. Totally. Okay, and then we have like 5 minutes. 5 minutes. See, we were supposed to talk half an hour. We talked an hour, and we're not even through everything we're supposed to talk about.
Right, and we can always reschedule.
Let's do a next part two.
What other thing is really interesting too with this quilt that I've submitted, that I did for the Long Beach Modern Quilt Field Challenge, which was the hardest thing I've ever done, and that was really interesting. But I submitted it to QuiltCon, so maybe there's more story there. So
cool.
We'll see.
Awesome. Is that the small, when was it this year that you did it for QuiltCon this year?
Yeah.
Is that the small challenge thing?
No, actually it is 60 by 80. But Long Beach Modern Quilt Guild did a challenge for their members.
Thank you.
For their members to use the brand new Kona solids. The new ones from this year, you had to use 75% of them, or use solids prints that read solid, and they opened it up to cotton and steel's essentials. And so, they issued this challenge to make a modern quilt. We submitted them in November, and anybody who bought a certain amount of fabric could vote on it. Of course, we all got to vote. And then on Tuesday was our Christmas party, and I got first place.
No way! That is so exciting.
And there's more to this story, too.
Okay.
Our president of our guild wants to make a pattern out of it.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so we're going to come back because we're going to QuiltCon this year.
That's a big story, I think.
That is a big story. So
I think it's really interesting because it's the painting's clearly in the public domain.
But, I love it. I totally love it.
That's actually how I found you, because it's like, okay, I want to do this, but I know there are issues.
Yeah. Well, let's play. Okay, cool. So sign up, and we will do part 2, which will be all about that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know these are not easy short stories to share, and I really do appreciate it. It means a lot. Oh, the kitten tried to eat my... Ron just brought an omelet, which is so awesome. The kitten is now very interested.
Good guy.
Yes, totally. All right, well, let's chat soon. Do you want to review this before it gets posted, or are you okay with it posting?
No, I'm perfectly fine. I will give my family and friends a heads up to be looking for it, I hope. And,
love it.
We can talk more about my journey. And
I would love it. So just sign up again. Oh my goodness, there's kitten. Okay, sign up again, and we'll just keep chatting. It'll be great. It'll be part 2.
Thanks, Elizabeth. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks. That means a lot. It really does. I can't wait to chat more.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Take care.
You too.
Bye. So you've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend-Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.